Chapter 14. After 3 years was Judas informed that Demetrius, the son of Seleucus, having entered by the haven of Tripolis with a great power and navy, had taken the country and killed Antiochus and Lysias his protector. Now one Alcimus, who had been high priest, and had defiled himself willfully in the times of their mingling with the Gentiles, seeing that by no means he could save himself, nor have any more access to the holy altar, came to King Demetrius in the 151st year, presenting unto him a crown of gold, and a palm, and also of the bows which were used solemnly in the temple. And so that day he held his peace, howbeit having got an opportunity to further his foolish enterprise, and being called into council by Demetrius, and asked how the Jews stood affected, and what they intended, he answered thereunto, Those of the Jews that be called Asidians, whose captain is Judas Maccabeus, nourish war, and are seditious, and will not let the realm be in peace. Therefore I, being deprived of my ancestors' honor, I mean the high priesthood, am now come hither. First, verily, for the unfeigned care I have of things pertaining to the king, and secondly, even for that I intend the good of my own countrymen. For all our nation is in no small misery through the unadvised dealing of them aforesaid. Wherefore, O king, seeing thou knowest all these things, be careful for the country and our nation, which is pressed on every side, according to the clemency that thou readily showest unto all. For as long as Judas liveth, it is not possible that the state should be quiet. This was no sooner spoken of him, but others of the king's friends, being maliciously set against Judas, did more incense Demetrius. And forthwith calling Nicanor, who had been master of the elephants, and making him governor over Judea, he sent him forth, commanding him to slay Judas, and to scatter them that were with him, and to make Alcimus high priest of the great temple. Then the heathen that had fled out of Judea from Judas came to Nicanor by flocks, thinking the harm and calamities of the Jews to be their welfare. Now when the Jews heard of Nicanor's coming, and that the heathen were up against them, they cast earth upon their heads, and made supplication to him that had established his people forever, and who always helpeth his portion with manifestation of his presence. So at the commandment of the captain they removed straightways from thence, and came near unto them that were at the town of Dessau. Now Simon, Judas's brother, had joined battle with Nicanor, but was somewhat discomfited through the sudden silence of his enemies. Nevertheless, Nicanor, hearing of the manliness of them that were with Judas, and the courageousness that they had to fight for their country, durst not try the matter by the sword. Wherefore he sent Posidonius, and Theodotus, and Mattathias to make peace. So when they had taken long advisement thereupon, and the captain had made the multitude acquainted therewith, and it appeared that they were all of one mind, they consented to the covenant, and appointed a day to meet in together by themselves. And when the day came, and stools were set for either of them, Judas placed armed men ready in convenient places, lest some treachery should be suddenly practiced by the enemies. So they made a peaceable conference. Now Nicanor abode in Jerusalem, and did no hurt, but sent away the people that came flocking unto him. And he would not willingly have Judas out of his sight, for he loved the man from his heart. He prayed him also to take a wife, and to beget children, so he married, was quiet, and took part of his life. But Alcimus, perceiving the love that was betwixt them, and considering the covenants that were made, came to Demetrius, and told him that Nicanor was not well affected towards the state, for that he had ordained Judas, a traitor to his realm, to be the king's successor. Then the king, being in a rage, and provoked with the accusations of the most wicked man, wrote to Nicanor, signifying that he was much displeased with the covenants, and commanding him that he should send Maccabeus prisoner in all haste unto Antioch. When this came to Nicanor's hearing, he was much confounded in himself, and took it grievously that he should make void the articles which were agreed upon, the man being in no fault, but because there was no dealing against the king, he watched his time to accomplish this thing by policy. Notwithstanding, when Maccabeus saw that Nicanor began to be churlish unto him, and that he entreated him more roughly than he was wont, perceiving that such sour behavior came not of good, he gathered together not a few of his men, and withdrew himself from Nicanor. But the other, knowing that he was notably prevented by Judas's policy, came into the great and holy temple, and commanded the priests that were offering their usual sacrifices to deliver him the man. And when they swore that they could not tell where the man was whom he sought, he stretched out his right hand toward the temple, and made an oath in this manner, If you will not deliver me Judas as a prisoner, I will lay this temple of God even with the ground, and I will break down the altar, and erect a notable temple unto Bacchus. After these words he departed. Then the priests lifted up their hands towards heaven, and besought him that was ever a defender of their nation, saying in this manner, Thou, O Lord of all things, who hast need of nothing, wast pleased that the temple of thy habitation should be among us. Therefore now, O holy Lord of all holiness, keep this house ever undefiled, which lately was cleansed, and stop every unrighteous mouth. Now there was accused unto Nicanor one Razis, one of the elders of Jerusalem, a lover of his countrymen, and a man of very good report, who for his kindness was called a father of the Jews. For in the former times, when they mingled not themselves with the Gentiles, he had been accused of Judaism, and did boldly jeopard his body and life with all vehemence for the religion of the Jews. So Nicanor, willing to declare the hate that he bore unto the Jews, sent above 500 men of war to take him, for he thought by taking him to do the Jews much hurt. Now when the multitude would have taken the tower, and violently broken into the outer door, and bade that fire should be brought to burn it, he being ready to be taken on every side fell upon his sword, choosing rather to die manfully than to come into the hands of the wicked, to be abused otherwise than beseemed his noble birth. But missing his stroke through haste, the multitude also rushing within the doors, he ran boldly up to the wall and cast himself down manfully among the thickest of them. But they quickly giving back, and a space being made, he fell down into the midst of the void place. Nevertheless, while there was yet breath within him, being inflamed with anger, he rose up, and though his blood gushed out like spouts of water, and his wounds were grievous, yet he ran through the midst of the throng, and standing upon a steep rock, when as his blood was now quite gone, he plucked out his bowels, and taking them in both his hands, he cast them upon the throng, and calling upon the Lord of life and spirit to restore him those again, thus he died. Chapter 15. But Nicanor, hearing that Judas and his company were in the strong places about Samaria, resolved without any danger to set upon them on the Sabbath day. Nevertheless, the Jews that were compelled to go with him said, O destroy not so cruelly and barbarously, but give honor to that day, which he that seeth all things hath honored with holiness above other days. Then this most ungracious wretch demanded, if there were a mighty one in heaven that had commanded the Sabbath day to be kept. And when they said, There is in heaven a living Lord and mighty, who commanded the seventh day to be kept. Then said the other, And I also am mighty upon earth, and I command to take arms, and to do the king's business. Yet he obtained not to have his wicked will done. So Nicanor, in exceeding pride and haughtiness, determined to set up a public monument of his victory over Judas and them that were with him. But Maccabeus had ever sure confidence that the Lord would help him. Wherefore he exhorted his people not to fear the coming of the heathen against them, but to remember the help which in former times they had received from heaven, and now expect the victory and aid which should come unto them from the Almighty. And so comforting them out of the law and the prophets, and withal putting them in mind of the battles that they had won afore, he made them more cheerful. And when he had stirred up their minds, he gave them their charge, showing them therewithal the falsehood of the heathen, and the breach of oaths. Thus he armed every one of them not so much with defensive shields and spears, as with comfortable and good words. And besides that, he told them a dream worthy to be believed, as if it had been so indeed, which did not little rejoice them. And this was his vision, that Onias, who had been high priest, a virtuous and a good man, reverend in conversation, gentle in condition, well-spoken also, and exercised from a child in all points of virtue, holding up his hands, prayed for the whole body of the Jews. This done in like manner, there appeared a man with grey hairs, and exceeding glorious, who was of a wonderful and excellent majesty. Then Onias answered, saying, This is a lover of the brethren, who prayeth much for the people, and for the holy city, to wit, Jeremias the prophet of God. Whereupon Jeremias, holding forth his right hand, gave to Judas a sword of gold, and in giving it spoke thus, Take this holy sword, a gift from God, with the which thou shalt wound the adversaries. Thus being well comforted by the words of Judas, which were very good, and able to stir them up to valor, and to encourage the hearts of the young men, they determined not to pitch camp, but courageously to set upon them, and manfully to try the matter by conflict, because the city and the sanctuary and the temple were in danger. For the care that they took for their wives and their children, their brethren, and kinfolks, was in least account with them. But the greatest and principal fear was for the holy temple. Also they that were in the city took not the least care, being troubled for the conflict abroad. And now, when as all looked what should be the trial, and the enemies were already come near, and the army was set in array, and the beasts conveniently placed, and the horsemen set in wings, Maccabeus, seeing the coming of the multitude, and the diverse preparations of armor, and the fierceness of the beasts, stretched out his hands towards heaven, and called upon the Lord that worketh wonders, knowing that victory cometh not by arms, but even as it seemeth good to him. He giveth it to such as are worthy. Therefore in his prayer he said after this manner, O Lord, thou didst send thy angel in the time of Ezekias king of Judea, and didst slay in the host of Sennacherib 185,000. Wherefore now also, O Lord of heaven, send a good angel before us for a fear and dread unto them. And through the might of thy arm, let those be stricken with terror that come against thy holy people to blaspheme. And he ended thus. Then Nicanor and they that were with him came forward with trumpets and songs, but Judas and his company encountered the enemies with invocation and prayer, so that fighting with their hands and praying unto God with their hearts, they slew no less than 35,000 men. For through the appearance of God were they greatly cheered. Now when the battle was done, returning again with joy, they knew that Nicanor lay dead in his harness. Then they made a great shout and a noise, praising the Almighty in their own language. And Judas, who was ever the chief defender of the citizens both in body and mind, and who continued his love towards his countrymen all his life, commanded to strike off Nicanor's head, and his hand with his shoulder, and bring them to Jerusalem. So when he was there, and had called them of his nation together, and set the priests before the altar, he sent for them that were of the tower, and showed them the vile Nicanor's head, and the hand of that blasphemer, which with proud brags he had stretched out against the holy temple of the Almighty. And when he had cut out the tongue of that ungodly Nicanor, he commanded that they should give it by pieces unto the fowls, and hang up the reward of his madness before the temple. So every man praised towards the heaven the glorious Lord, saying, Blessed be he that hath kept his own place undefiled. He hanged also Nicanor's head upon the tower, an evident and manifest sign unto all the help of the Lord. And they ordained all with a common decree in no case to let that day pass without solemnity, but to celebrate in the 13th day of the 12th month, which in the Syrian tongue is called Adar, the day before Mardochius's day. Thus went it with Nicanor, and from that time forth the Hebrews had the city in their power. And here will I make an end, and if I have done well, and as is fitting the story, it is that which I desired. But if slenderly and meanly, it is that which I could attain unto. For as it is hurtful to drink wine or water alone, and as wine mingled with water is pleasant, and delighteth the taste, even so speech finely framed delighteth the ears of them that read the story. And here shall be an end. The end of the second book of the Maccabees.
While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, Greetings, Rabbi, and kissed him. Jesus replied, Do what you came for, friend. Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Put your sword back in its place, Jesus said to him. For all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the Scriptures be fulfilled that say, It must happen in this way? In that hour Jesus said to the crowd, Am I leading a rebellion that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this has all taken place that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus, so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 came forward and declared, This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, I charge you, under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." "You have said so," Jesus replied. "But I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" "He is worthy of death," they answered. Then they spat in his face and struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, Messiah. Who hit you?" Now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. "You also were with Jesus of Galilee," she said. But he denied it before them all. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Then he went out to the gateway, where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." He denied it again with an oath. "I don't know the man." After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." Then he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, "I don't know the man." Immediately a cock crowed. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken, "Before the cock crows, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly.
Almost heaven, West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountains, Shenandoah River. Life is old there, older than the trees, younger than the mountains, growing like a breeze. Country roads, take me home to the place I belong. West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home. Country roads, all my memories gather round her. Miner's lady, stranger to blue water, dark and dusty, painted on the sky, misty taste of moonshine, teardrop in my eye.